Right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your patience. My name's Philip Bloom. I'm the curator of the Chinese Garden and director of the Center for East Asian Garden Studies here at the Huntington. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to today's lecture by Professor Michael Stanley-Baker of Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. Thank you all so much for being here. I'd like to express my particular thanks to the Carol, Edward, Ariana, and Joseph Wong Trust, and to the Justin Vanya Memorial Fund for supporting this lecture. Before we begin, please take note of the emergency exits marked in red, and please also set your cell phones and other noise-making devices to silent mode. As many of you know, in the spring of 2024, the Huntington opened the Caiyaopu, our Chinese medicinal garden. This is a small section of the Chinese garden that's dedicated to considering relationships between plants and people, relationships that are at once universal and culturally specific. The garden is home to a collection of about 120 species of plants, each of which plays an important role in Chinese medicine, past or present. The medicines have been divided into a series of beds that exemplify some of the ways that people use and think about flora. They tell a story about people's relationship with plants. They show that humans everywhere make use of plants as medicines, as foods, as dyes, and as ornamentals. But they also show that it's only in China that plants really have become part of a correlative cosmology that describes the relationships among all things in the world. The medicinal garden has quickly become one of the most popular and meaningful sections of the Chinese garden. Every day one can find visitors reminiscing about herbs that they remember from their childhoods, or encountering plants whose forms and functions may be entirely unfamiliar to them. We chose to devote last year's lecture series to Chinese medicinal herbs in order to celebrate the opening of the garden and to bring to life some of the many stories and histories that are embodied in these plants. Among the speakers we'd hoped to include last year was our speaker today, Professor Michael Stanley-Baker. Last year, we had announced his talk, and he had even made his flight reservations, but he ultimately was unable to come due to last-minute preparations for his tenure portfolio. Happily, his application for tenure was approved, and he's able to join us today. Professor Michael Stanley-Baker is Associate Professor in the School of Humanities at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. A historian of Chinese medicine and religion, he specializes in the early imperial period and also has a burgeoning interest in the modern Sinophone diaspora. He received his PhD from the Wellcome Trust Center for the History of Medicine at University College London. He received an MA in East Asian Languages and Cultures at Indiana University in Bloomington, and he also has a clinical degree in Chinese medicine. His work focuses on the intersections of Chinese medicine with different forms of knowledge, including religion, botany, trade, and policy. He's the author of a forthcoming monograph, Medicine and Religion in Early Imperial China, and he's been the editor of a number of works, including the Routledge Handbook of Chinese Medicine, Situating Religion and Medicine in Asia, and the Encyclopedia of Health Humanities. And many of the publications that he's worked on are available as open access publications. The Routledge Handbook of Chinese Medicine in particular is just a totally invaluable resource. Professor Stanley-Baker also engages extensively with digital humanities. You'll hear a bit about one of the projects today called Polyglot Asian Medicine, which includes digital maps of early Chinese pharmacopoeia, full-text archives of Buddhist, Taoist, and medical texts, as well as Peranakan and Malay text archives. He's also very interested in connecting traditional medicine with modern science, for example, by linking Chinese and Malay traditional drug names with modern botany and biodiversity databases. He's received a number of fellowships and awards for teaching, and he's active as a leader in professional organizations for both the history of medicine and Taoist studies. In short, he's incredibly energetic, incredibly knowledgeable, and incredibly busy. This month alone, he's giving talks in England, California, and Korea with short stopovers back home in Singapore. It's really an honor to have him here. So at the end of Professor Stanley-Baker's talk, we'll open to questions from you all in the audience. If you're watching online, please feel free to post your questions into the chat box at any time, and I'll post them myself to Professor Stanley-Baker. So please join me in welcoming Michael Stanley-Baker to discuss When Drugs Leave Their Place of Origin, the Longue Durée of Chinese Medical Migration.
Wow, good afternoon. It's amazing to see you here. Thank you for coming out in this cold and wet day, but to what an incredible location. I've been really moved by the richness and the depth of attention and care that everyone has put into their work here. It's really, really impressive, and it's very it's a real honor to be invited here. Thank you so much, Philip and Michelle, for all of your work. And I'm sorry it was so much work to get me here, but I'm very, very glad to be here finally. And what I hope to do is to share with you is just a few insights that kind of occurred to me through working on kind of the history of Chinese medicine from a new location. When I moved to Singapore, I found myself in a diasporic community, much like the community here in LA. And yet it has its own history and its own language and its own rhythms that over the years has really shaped the work that I've been doing and really helped me kind of think about the ways in which knowledge and objects travel and the memories that people bring with them. So I'm going to, I'll talk a little bit about the four images you see on the screen as we go through the talk, but I'm going to begin by introducing you to our herb garden on campus. The Nanyang Community Herb Garden is one of two. There's another one which has sort of been designed for public display, and the herbs are more dormant than not in that one. But this one is really a thriving location. It was founded by one man, and then who garnered around him a huge wellspring of support. And it was through learning from Uncle Ng, who I'll introduce you to, that kind of got me inspired to think about the work that is behind the website and the kind of data projects that this website houses, which are very much about translation, and I hope you'll see why through this talk. So the community garden it's a wonderful, lively place. Here you see Uncle Bei, who's the current head of the garden, teaching my students from, I think this is a bioinformatics class, or I take three types of students here, one for history of biopolitics, history of Chinese medicine, and history of Chinese food. We all come through the garden, and he will tell us about the ways in which he knows the plants, how they taste, how they grow, what bugs eat them, how to manage the soil, and also the different dialect names for them, and then how different dialect communities will use them differently. So it's a wealth of knowledge, and every time I go to the garden, I'm always so overawed by his depth of knowledge, and I just want to keep apprenticing with him. So, but having a busy life that I have with all my teaching and research responsibilities, and there's only so much I can hold, so I thought, okay, I'll do a data project to try and capture that. And that's really been the inspiration of it's following in the footsteps of Uncle Bei here. But it's not just students and plants. The local community has really thrived at different points in the garden's history. Here you can see the dean of the School of Humanities at an event where we're welcoming Gan Kim-yong, the Minister for Health, who's coming to visit. And people come and give talks and share tea and stories. Many of them volunteer in the gardens. And so the two main sort of characters are pictured here in a way. These two photos characterize their personalities quite well. You see Uncle Ng, or in Guoyu it would be Uncle Huang, who founded the garden in 2009 when his brother passed away from cancer. And after a long bout of troubles, he wanted to help other people and prevent them these troubles. So he did a lot of research. He taught himself herbalism. He's not a heritage knowledge for him. It's something he learned through reading books, and gave the plants away for free. And the garden still gives plants away for free to this day. But it also became the subject of research by researchers in the biology lab, people working on new natural products, also looking for new pharmaceuticals. But Uncle Huang really gathered around him. It was a very community-oriented character. And then Uncle Bei much prefers to be up in the garden with the plants, just working there. So these are the two. But Uncle Bei is very happy to share his knowledge, as you can see in this clip. Once COVID started, we couldn't visit the garden in person, and then we haven't been able to in the last couple of years while they're refurbishing. So he kindly lets me come and pick up plants, which then he tells us about, and I bring those plants to the students. Here he is. OK。
这个是红叶铁树。
红叶铁树，哇哦，好大一把。
这个水丁香。
水丁香。
有人叫水香蕉呢。
Okay. So he's full of lore about how to differentiate the different plants, what they're good for, which ones you shouldn't eat too much of, how to cook them. He'll tell you, whether you should fry this take this with a fried egg, or this one you make into a juice, or that one you cook with pork shoulder. And but it's all very rapid fire like this. It's very hard to keep up. So he's been very much an inspiration for a data project, right? And so the last few years, I've been taking the plants into the classroom and sharing them with the students. And then the students sift through, they pick a particular plant, they listen to him, and they wait to figure out what their plant's going to be, and then capture the name, and then we look it up in the database and do some research about it. But this very kind of local, homegrown community, and very kind of localized and intimate, this intimate knowledge is something that has actually spread very far across Southeast Asia. This is migratory knowledge. For example, Uncle Huang gave me a recipe of 4 different plants to give to my dad for his diabetes. So we wrapped up 4 of these and took them as Christmas presents one year, planted them in the garden, and here you can see my father. He lives in Bali, on Bali Island, not Paris. And here's the gardener. And then they took these 4 kind of samples and then planted this huge, a year later I came back to find it just completely sprung up. And so he was taking them as, not as a Chinese form of medicine, but as a jamu. And local Indonesian tradition would make a fresh juice every morning, often with turmeric and ginger, very kind of spicy. You can put pepper into your jamu. So kind of using it in a different tradition, and we see this kind of adaptation as these traditions circulate. So one herb that's very famous, it's very well known as an anti-cancer herb, also for diabetes, and as a diuretic, is this one called Heimianjiangjun. And it's subject to kind of regional variation. It was being studied in the biology lab, and they were doing in silico testing, like modeling the computer modeling the molecules, and then doing in vitro testing. And they sent a batch. They asked their colleagues in Guangzhou to do tests on this species, and And they came back and the test didn't pan out, didn't match with what they were finding down in Singapore. And the question remained, well, is that because of the way the tests were performed, weren't up to standard? Or was it that the local varietal species in Guangzhou doesn't have the same properties as those that grow down in Singapore? So these kind of questions about the nature of the plants, how they're being used, how they're growing, make for a very complex set of questions for integration, right, into standardized modern medicine, where there's the expectation that you'd have a single regularized molecule or set that's highly predictable. This tradition of translation has its heritages. I was visiting the Chinese Medical College in Penang on the north end of Malaysia, near the Myanmar border, and talking with the president of the school there. And as I described our garden, she said, "Oh, well, you should take a volume of this. This is from a 1988 exhibition of local Malay plants, which they wrote about in Chinese for the Chinese herbal community and the general public. But these are very much kind of as it were, a new Shen Nong Ben Cao, right? These are kind of the new discoveries and documentations of Malay tradition. Oh, that's the other thing I forgot to mention about Uncle Huang. Because they speak Hokkien as their kind of mother tongue, I'd assumed that what we were taking was Chinese medicine. But in fact, the majority of the plants, as I looked on the wall of his sort of the alcove near his garden, where he'd had these placards describing all the different plants in Chinese, I began to think, oh, my Chinese herbal lore must not be that good because I'm not recognizing these species and I don't recognize these plants. Until I saw one poster that said, very good for insomnia, curry leaves and milk, hot milk. Okay, this is not a Chinese recipe. And so that got me thinking again, and I realized most of these are not actually in the Chinese materia medica. They're not mainstream herbs at all in that tradition, but they are mainstream in the Malay medicine. And so there's one of the terms of hand in Malaysia is for ethnic groups, communities that move to Malaysia, that marry into Malaysian families and then localize and develop hybrid cultures. These are called Peranakan. You can have Peranakan Indians, Peranakan Javanese, and Peranakan Chinese. And in Singapore, the dominant Peranakan, of course, is Chinese. It's a Chinese majority city. So I come to call this medicine Peranakan medicine. It's this hybrid mixture. And of course, this doesn't just go back to 1988. Migration and travel and trade through the region has been going back to the Han Dynasty, at least, that we have records. And there's long, well-heeled roots of exchange of knowledge that these herbs are moving along. So it was this that really got me interested as an oral expression of a long but not well-documented tradition. And how could I learn more about it? So I talked to Uncle Huang, and he shared with me his library. So I took pictures of his library and went and found all of those books, and I converted them into a database. And this is sort of the general, the behind the hood structure. So we can see the Chinese pharmacological system is much more complex in the way the herbs are described, and I'll show a little bit more about that data in a second. And then we found, while we were capturing these Malay plant names, we scoured about 24, 26 different sort of colonial survey dictionaries. We found at the end that we'd actually come across a couple of a language we weren't expecting. So we have Bahasa Sarawak in there, and because we have linguists in the linguistics department working with local tribes down near Papua New Guinea, in the Alores Island, with this Abui tribe, they documented a few traditions there. So I thought, well, why don't we make the system work with current ethnopharmacological data? So we have a few, 30 or so drugs from the Abui system. And then what we did was we used the botanical names to link between the Chinese and the Malay. So whatever claims about botanical identities are being made to the Chinese tradition and whatever are being made to the Malay tradition by researchers, we just glued them together, but of course we needed to standardize that, so we teamed up with Kew Gardens in London, and they cleaned up all of our botanical name data so it was standardized and we can translate across. These aren't necessarily historical assertions. What we see are representations of what our dictionary authors are, those claims. And so the data that's in the website is not a truth claim. I'm a historian by training, so I think about this as a representation of previous documenters, rather than a claim to truth out there in IRL, in real life. Nevertheless, this kind of data is helpful, right, to figure out what that might be. So the website has a few different functions. There's a few different parts of it. We have an ethnobotanical synonymy, which I've just shown you the structure of, which links multiple languages across. We have Malay and Chinese manuscripts which have been transcribed, a large cache which was donated from the Zhongyi Keshuyuan, the Chinese Academy of Chinese Medical Science in Beijing. And then we have some historical maps that I'll explain about. But through these, mainly these two sources, we link out to modern science and other kinds of knowledge. So we link to historical and modern biodiversity studies. We link out to the heritage of kind of early modern manuscripts. There's a great library called the Biodiversity Heritage Library. And then we link out to bioactivity databases that document the kind of bioactive ingredients in the herbs. So this is mainly the strongest drive to construct these databases has all been around Chinese plants and it's been done in China. So we link to them I'll show you in a minute, but when you're searching, you'll find that the links to the bioinformatics is through the Chinese, so therefore it's by the Chinese name. Whereas the links to the botanical species are linked, such as these ones, are linked from the botanical name. So the links are by those. So here's a little introduction. Let's see if this runs. Here we go.
Hai, nama saya Siti Nomuda. Ini kedai turunan saya. Saya kita di Bilang Serai.
These videos were taken by our students of a class of myself and Dr. Faiza Zakaria, who's now at National University Singapore, who did the Malay manuscript section of the database. So we house a few fun manuscript images and then transcriptions of them. We have digital maps of the early Bencao tradition and using historical GIS to locate where those place names that you find in the text, where they were located on the ground. And seeing them in their geographic contours offers new kinds of insights that weren't available to earlier scholars of the tradition. So it's, and I'll talk a little bit more about my sort of conclusions from using this way of viewing the distribution of the tradition. You can download all of this data, it's open access, and then we can, with the manuscript database, for the Malay text, they're multilingual. This is Peranakan, so you can see it's Chinese with Baba Malay annotations, because many of these texts are transmitted through families who no longer read Chinese, but they can speak Malay. Our texts are highly segmented, so they're broken down into paragraph levels. We have a bilingual catalog, sort of hierarchical catalog, according to sort of medical categories in the Chinese tradition. And then we've took some texts and we tagged them very densely, and I'll show you how those tags enable us to navigate the text and explore this kind of data in more rich ways. Also, we can then export particular searches for things from those texts, turn them into data tables, and then translate those into graphical interfaces, which enable us to relook at the tradition in a different way and find new kinds of relationship through what we call social network software. So rather than looking them at tables or reading them as narratological texts, we can sort of see what kinds of data are similar across different texts, depending on what you're searching for. And through very useful tools like Stanford's Palladio website, you can filter things in and out, and learn kind of new relationships that are there in the tradition to be read. Also, for our tagged 本草经济注, which is a layered text, you can go to individual passages, you can view the entirety of the distribution alongside the text, and you can also align different dynastic maps underneath them. So you can see as political dynasties change, how that affected access to herbal supply. And then these individual paragraphs can be shown, so you can visualize where those herbs are being described in a given passage. We've also been trialing with linking out to biographical data, etc. So we have actually, since I made this video, we've also added 12 South Asian languages, but I'll show you a little bit more about that later. So we've been experimenting with the Malay text, and we link out directly from the Malay text to the synonymy, so you can then explore. And so what you'll find is you'll have a primary name, but each drug name will often have alternate names as well, so we link those. The Malay medicine also describes, that data also includes drug function within the map itself. For the Chinese system, it's a little more complex. So we'll document the botanical name and then link out to sites like the Kew Gardens Medicinal Plant Name Services, which has many different languages for those specific species. And then to the Biodiversity Heritage Library, which is nice because they have first edition scans of manuscripts, and they've tagged all of their sources, so you can search for species and find them even if they've been, those species have been changed or are spelled differently. Plants of the World Online, which is also produced by Kew, produces a nice image of the plant, but also shows you maps that describe historical migration. So the green is where the plant originally grew, and then the purple color shows you where they've migrated to. But once you have found your Malay name, for example, and then you click on the botanical name, that will then link out to the other languages. And in this version of the video, we just have the Chinese. But you can see how this one, we're going to link out from Piper nigrum, and we discover that it's hujiao. And the Chinese data has slightly more information in it. We have the primary names, or the zhuming, as well as the bianming. It also includes regions where the plants are grown, and also describes the part of the plant, and also the provenance, or the time, the chu, the text in which the name is first mentioned. We link out from these to Chinese language TCM databases, as well as to English language ones. So it's useful for practitioners, and if you want to really get into detail about what those plants do, you can. So here we find that hujiao is first called that in the Xinxiu Bencao, in the 650 text that was edited in the Tang Dynasty for the court in 659. So we have information about the author. what we are about to introduce, we've also found that the GIS points for each of the authors that we have, or for whom we have data, in case those authors are representing regional naming traditions that are local to them. So again, giving us a slightly more resolution about where those plant names come from. And then linking to the bioactivity databases, they will identify the biomolecular components, the human gene targets as those ingredients affect, and then the diseases that are related to those gene targets. So we can already begin to map through and across these different medical systems using quite rigorous interconnections. It's been a labor of love for many people, actually, internationally, for people from National Taiwan University, from Max Planck Institute, from Fa-Gu-Shan, from Dharma Drum Institute. Scholars around the world have contributed to that. So what that enables us to do, I can show you a little bit. So, for example, tagging the Bencao. It's a lovely text that lends itself to a data structure very well, because it's written in a highly regularized way. And then we use historical GIS to mark it up. So GIS points that are produced by Harvard and by Fa-Gu-Shan and Fudan University. And we would read texts that were that described the location, and then we would find GIS points that were closest to those descriptions, and then human tag those. And so what that gave us was this map. And I remember when I first made it, I showed my director in Germany, and she said, "This is a very nice map, but what does it mean? Why does it look like that?" And it took me about 10 years to figure that out. But I started noticing after a while that all of the points, if you see here, are not located where I thought they would be, because tradition says it's the Xianren, the mountain men, who produce these in the marketplaces. And then Yamada Keiji, the great scholar, a Japanese scholar of Chinese medicine, had argued that the Bencao was originated in the Zhongyuan, in the Central Plains. But in fact, it appears that it's riverways that were really the most important node that are being described in this system, in this documentation. So I wrote a little article about it, which was received very well by the American Academy for the History of Medicine. And so I was actually really following Yamada Keiji's work, and this is his map, where he argues that the tradition emerges between Taishan and Songshan, and between Handan and the Yellow River. But as we've seen, really it's happening along waterways, and more particularly along one waterway, the Yellow River. But the Yellow River corridor, interestingly, extends not just to, this picture may not show it as well, but I think you can see here, where the Yellow River comes down from the north and then hooks out as it heads out towards the sea. But this corridor doesn't stop there. It, of course, extends to Chang'an, the capital, but through this large node, Hanzhong, which turns out to be the second most important trading zone, into the Ba Plains, or the Shu Plains of Sichuan. So there's this new kind of trading route. So suddenly, what I thought was going to be telling me about biotopes where plants grow turns out to be about prehistoric trading routes that haven't been documented. But we can see them in the landscape. But it told me something else as well, that rather than emerging in the mountains, right, Songshan and Taishan, definitely Taishan is the most prominent site. It has the most ingredients being produced, but most of them are minerals, because this was the site where Han Wudi did the Fenglan Shan rituals and did immortality practices. So it had that legacy of the kind of sacred site. And these Xianren who sought immortality and magical powers, and that they were recording their observations. Turns out, in fact, it's something else. It's this kind of stepwise trading between local regions along riverways, within these microeconomies and local relations of exchange, much like these kind of local relationships of exchange that I was getting to know in Singapore. And one of the things that we can't really be confident about is what the species are that they were using, because botanical identification, as we know since Linnaeus, didn't exist then. So practices were more varied. However, what we do have, the reliable data we have, is that we have drug names. Drugs were being given names at a particular time in a particular place. So this is the kind of reliable philological data that we can count on. And it tells us something else. If these points aren't biotopes where the plants are growing, actually what they're sites of socio-technical exchange, where objects were being translated, objects we don't know, from the wild, into human domains and beginning to circulate in these socio-economic networks where they were encountered by the people who wrote the Bancao, who were documenting this. And this kind of translation was multi-epistemic. Different kinds of knowers were handling them in different ways. And Tao Hongjing, one of the great editors of the Bancao tradition, writes about it. He says there's the pickers in the fields, the pickers in the wild, who bring them into the markets. They don't know what the sellers in the marketplace do. And the sellers in the marketplace are cheaters and swindlers, and they will paint the herbs white and red and deceive people who are buying them. And the doctors who purchase them also don't know what the other two are doing. And so there's this chain of exchange that's going on. But what we do know is that drug names were important markers that enabled these objects to circulate, even though we can't be sure of what species they may be now. And I'll show you how I handle that in the database. So this is what I ended up concluding in my paper is part of this absence of documentation is because of the Confucian historiography. Confucian writing prioritizes first and foremost the ruler, and then the chen, the ministers who serve them, right? And the lowliest of any of the classes is merchants, people who deal with money and people who work with their hands. So this historiographic kind of slighting of this socio-technical work was transformed that work into this myth of the Xianren, right, the transcendent Taoists. So we can kind of enrich our imagination a little bit about not only about where these things were taking place, but also what was going on and who was doing it. Okay, so that's one of the tools, the things that is there on the website, is this kind of visualization and mapping. Another one is our textual archive. We have the text database has almost 30 million characters, which is close to around 9% of the contents of the Sikuqian Shu. As I mentioned, it's highly segmented, and that enables us to extract these paragraph level, and really what I'm looking for is recipe level segments out as data tables. And the system produced by National Taiwan University brings along with the citations rich metadata. And this is a philologist's dream, where every paragraph has attached to it the name of the author, the edition, the date it was produced, the date of the original text, the GIS identity, location of the author. All these things that we've loaded into the bibliography travel along and are connected to these texts. And then we can use that with social networking software and observe and play with it and observe change over time. So what you see here, these larger nodes are texts, and where you see the characters, those are herb names. I'm searching in this example for guizhitang, which is a 2nd century recipe by Zhang Zhongjing, cinnamon twig decoction. And what I did was I took all of the recipes that had guizhitang in it, and then took out the 5 main ingredients of guizhitang, so we can see what we're seeing on the graph is the other ingredients that are added in. And so as the slider moves over time, you can see different sort of habits emerging, and these cluster. You can see the relationships between the texts beginning to emerge. So it's a nice way of reading at a large scale this relationship across texts. And then you can, I'll just skip ahead here to the result. Yeah, so I'm extracting these ingredients. So what we're seeing, what we're left with is the add-ons. And you see a few things turning up. You see on the one hand, there's one of the ingredients, 芍药, isn't distinguished between 赤芍 and 白芍, like red peony and white peony until the Song dynasty in the 10th, 11th century. So you can see camps that side on the red peony camp. You can see other authors that are siding on the white peony camp. You see a collection of authors in the Tang, kind of hovering and being close to the Qianjin Yaofang, Sun Cimiao's great text. And then you see the emergence of external medicine. These kind of doctors who didn't do internal theoretical pharmacology, but treated broken bones and bruises and cuts and contusions, and were considered a lower class of doctor. But by the time we get to the Ming Dynasty, they start to treat these external injuries with theoretical medicine, theoretical pharmacology. And you can see them start to share knowledge and sort of working in similar fields. This takes place around the 14th century. So it's a fun way to read texts in a new way. That's really the goal. Okay, so that's the text corpus. Now I'm going to tell you about the synonymy, where I've been putting the most energy in recent years. These statistics are now out of date because we have, although the Chinese and Malay ones are accurate, we now have even more South Asian names. So we have 42,000 Chinese names and almost 8,500 botanical names. And those have historical synonyms as botany has evolved. We have 3,000 Malay drug names. And then we have the chu-chu, so all this biographical data on the texts in which the names first appear and their authors. So yes, we looked at this graph, so this is kind of how it's structured. So now you can see why the Chinese data is much more complex, why that occupies a bigger part of the graph. So this is a bit about how to explore it when you're reading through. So you can search for a scientific species in the second search box. If you want to use the website, it's open access. And then you go down and select the species that you're looking for, and then it will give you different drugs that are listed in that species. The drug name appears, and then you can select on here, and then you'll have lots of information popping up in these windows here. And so here's the primary name, and here's the index number, and then we have multiple species, right? So we have two different kinds of Acularia that are associated with Chenxiang. And then we have down here the provenance will come up, and the Mingyi Bielu is a 5th century, 5th century text. So entering fairly early on to the tradition. Okay. And here we have links to Kew and to the Biodiversity Heritage Library and the other sites. So you can find out a lot of information about any individual drug just by researching through this in a kind of systematic way. And that got in twice. Okay. But you can also do historical research. So, for example, because these are all aligned along a particular species, when the name varies quite a bit, you can still identify their relationship by looking for the species. In this case, I looked up dingxiang, or cloves, which up until the 18th century only grew in one specific place, which is the Molucca Islands south of the Philippines, because of particular volcanic environment there. And so which produced the species. And the Dutch kind of maintained a monopoly on that trade from the 15th, 16th century on. But you can see just by looking at the different names and when they emerge in the tradition in China, you can see how that trade has changed over time. So first you had the fruit coming in the 5th century, and then the seed in the 6th century. But then you have, this Dingxiang Shupi that in the Tang Dynasty in the 8th century, they're using the bark. And then the root in the 11th, twigs in the 16th, and then essential oils in the 18th. So these are also paralleling different layers of historical trade and expansion. Obviously, by the 18th century, you're having a lot of Jesuits and European medicine coming in, possibly even during the 16th. So we get these different visibilities by analyzing them through a digital approach. So our South Asian drug terms, we'll have to thank colleagues in the University of TDU in Bengaluru. A huge variety of names here. So you can see here I've looked for curcuma, for turmeric, and this is how this different languages will pop out, and of the one species, and you can then explore it like that. So it links out to the Chinese and then the Sanskrit. Sanskrit, there's a lot of names in Sanskrit, so you can tell it was very important in the Ayurvedic tradition. So it's also a little fun. I mean, I was a teenager in the 80s, so I like to play video games. So this is also like a video gamey kind of way of doing research. Okay, so that gives you a sense of kind of how you can explore it. Of course, it's only in the Chinese data that we get a sense of we have this Chu data, the provenance, but it comes into China in the Tang Dynasty, in the Xinxiu Bencao. Okay. So one of the things we've just resolved, and I'm kind of excited to share with you, because we want to tag our texts and we want to give them we wanted a single code for each name. We have this problem of polynomia in that the one code may refer to multiple things. And in fact, this is the problem that got me into this whole database in the first place, because I was translating Taoist texts about, I don't know, over 10 years ago. This must be, maybe 10, 15 years ago. And I kept thinking, it's got to be one plant. I've got to be able to tell it's one thing because I need to move on with my translation. And I kept finding there wasn't a stable answer, and there wasn't a stable answer. And you have this two kinds of problem. One, a herb, the same name can appear for the same drug in different places. They can occur in multiple entries. But the same name can also refer to multiple species. So with the homonym code, what we've done is you can search for this. I've shown this because it's the first one in our list of homonyms. This one term has these 11 or so different species that are associated with it. And then it's repeated as this species. When you actually open all of them out, you can see the complexity of what's going on with Ibaozhen. The golden diamonds are the species, and I've brought them into this sort of inner cluster. But these are all the alternate names for these drugs, and many of them are homonyms, and they have these other relations out. So you get a sense for the diversity and complexity and why standardization is still a problem today, and achieving kind of regularity in the modern drug marketplace is a complex issue. But I think we've gone a good step towards being able to see it and to visualize it. Okay, so I did mention about extending out into real life and taking herbs to my dad earlier, herbs from Singapore. But another thing that I discovered is you can do AI recognition now of plants to a more or less accurate degree. It's not 100% reliable. But I found I was looking for an Indian plant I wanted to bring to my dad for his birthday, and because he's starting to take Ayurvedic herbs. So I looked at the Ayurvedic herbs. I found a translation into Malay using the system, and then through social networking, I talked with some people in a social network community in Bali, and I said, "Did anybody tell me where I can find this gotukola in Bali on my way from the airport to my dad's farm?" He lives out here in Nagara, and the airport's down here. And they said, oh yes, you can go see this lady here, and she will have it. And indeed, she did. So that really was a nice test for me to show that these kind of data really can begin to reach out into the real world and into communities. And I'm really excited to be taking this work, to be thinking with people about how to better integrate, not just between ancient knowledge and contemporary practice of those ancient knowledges, but also between ancient knowledge and modern forms of knowing. So I mentioned AI, we can, obviously there are these new apps, that we could connect into this data. Also, as I began to be discussing these kind of work on the internet, I found that colleagues from the US, both TCM practitioners, but also herbal farmers, were wanting to discover more about this. And they began to say, well, if you can map it on GIS, then we can start to use, climate maps and Köppen-Geiger maps, like these two different ones, to find comparable growing regions and approximate the Chinese herbal marketplace. Right now, the Chinese the herbal market is going through a doubling. One study argues that from 2022 to 2028 or 2030, the global marketplace will expand from 150 billion a year to 300 billion. And this is a result of many, many different kinds of forces that I can't begin to describe today. But it raises questions, right? And these are the questions that I kind of want to think about. When plants and animals, this is Su Jing, the editor of the Tang Imperial Pharmacopoeia, the Xinxiu, the newly revised Bencao. He said, when plants and animals leave their original grounds, then the material will remain the same, but their efficacy will change. I think today we live in a much more complex world because not only are we having the plants, the objects themselves move, they're also being transported into different new kinds of technologies and different kinds of economies. And they're being now grown in different kinds of ecologies. So we have many different dimensions to think about these cultures. And this is what I really appreciate about the collaboration between historians and anthropologists, because historians can look at the textual legacy, and anthropologists can tell us about contemporary practice in its rich detail. I was lucky to spend a Saturday afternoon with Robert Hoffman at Yosan University. And as I raised this question to him, he said, this is the best topic. I love this topic. This is really important. And he began to talk about how even plants that are grown from one particular supplier over years will change in their consistency and quality. And, different companies who may be, not just getting them from one particular region, but they may be getting from a few. You'll see a lot of variation over the years, and that can have effects on the concentration of your dosage. So it's not just the terroir that's changing it, but the local climate, right? So to the extent that, if the syrup that's going through the pipes as you're making your herbal concentrate can become stickier, then you need to use more excipients, and then the solutions are becoming more diluted. And so the knowing of Chinese medicine, the knowing of the right dose, I asked him, how do you describe it? And he said, you just know because you taste it and you see it in your patients. And you have to have this, right, this kind of knowledge of the hands and eyes. And this is something I really appreciate. It speaks to a kind of, we call it artisanal knowing, and I think it's a slightly, it doesn't represent as much the alacrity and intelligence of this kind of knowledge. It's not uneducated at all. It's a highly educated, highly sensitive attunement, not just to textual legacy, not just to clinical potential effects, but to the body of the practitioner, the body of the patient, and the quality of that clinical encounter. Lorraine Wilcox also recommended me a great article. She was there in the room, and we're having this fantastic discussion. I want to recommend an article by Elena Springer, who contributed a great chapter to the Routledge volume that we published. And she described the herbal, what the bensao is. And she said the bensao is not a text. It's not even a genre of writing. It's a whole culture. It's geographically rich. It's biologically vast. All kinds of experts are working in this field, right? Old school philologists, Taoists in the mountains, marketeers, new people, new forms of packaging, public servants who are busy trying to legislate, scholars at universities, governments who are trying to create soft power. You may have heard of the kind of transition of the Chinese government during COVID, sort of promoting 那个莲花清瘟胶囊, the kind of the anti-COVID formula from China, as a form of soft power. These dimensions are rich, and so the herbal field is a complex, diverse, wonderful place to be thinking in, and it's wonderful to be thinking in a community of brilliant scholars and practitioners. And I've just been so impressed just by the very brief time that I've had here about the quality of expertise, the depth of attention and intention towards representing that thickness of conversation, that thickness of culture here in the garden at Huntington. And I want to thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share this time with you.
Great. Thank you so much, Professor Stanley-Baker. So if you'd like to ask a question, I'd ask that you come up to the microphones and pose it directly. While you're thinking of questions, I'll just start by asking something very simple. What's the kind of human side of the production of all of the databases? How does the tagging of texts and all of that sort of thing work to create something as diverse and impressive as what you've been working on? What's the team look like?
I'd say it's a patchwork quilt of a happy band. We kind of, over different times and different, because I've worked on this project with colleagues in National Taiwan University, designed the DocuSky, the system for housing the texts. Hilda de Wet and Brent Ho designed the tagging, one of the first tagging systems that we used at the time they were in Leiden. The first round of tagging the bensao, we hired someone in Dharma Drum University, Fa Guoshan, and she worked on it. But I was living in Berlin at the time, so I was not very good at checking. The distance really mattered because the noise of an email is not the same as the presence of a colleague and friend. So we re-tagged, we reread them through with a postdoc and some undergraduate students in Singapore. So that was the second edition of that text. And then we're sort of fairly satisfied. Right now, a very lovely graduate student working with me we are marking up, I have a set of divination recipes. They're called yaoqian, and you shake some sticks at an altar, and one will come out, and you check by babui, doing a kind of check with the gods, throwing some divination blocks to check that it's the right one. If it is, then you go to a box and you take your number, and that's your recipe from the gods. I was visiting one of these I was collecting them in Penang, and I walked into the nearest herbal store, about 10 minutes down the road, and he was like, what are you, Mr. American-looking person, doing in my, dusty little shop here in Penang? And I said, I'm just, curious about medicine here and what it's like and what's going on. And I've just been collecting recipes at the temple. And he said, oh, let me show you. And he pulled out from his drawer his father's handwritten copies, and word for word was identical to the set I just collected from the temple. So Zhijun, we've been playing with AI to scan those recipes, and then she's been correcting them. And then we're now using a combination of AI and then assessing the AI to read into our database and then find a tag for it. And then we're asking the AI to give its reasoning. Is it because of phonetics? Is it because of character similarity? For the ones that are not obvious. Is it just general AI knowledge of Chinese medicine? And we're kind of, yeah. So it's a mixture of things. Luckily in Singapore, for me, and I think the students like it too, they're kind of a little capitalistic about knowledge production. You can, with data work, you can hierarchize the complexity of it and give it to different students. Some students apprentice for a year because they want to do a project and they don't really know what. I'm like, well, would you want to work on this? And so they get a piece of work, I get some data, and we all learn together. So it's a variety of, hodgepodge, friendly gangs that get together over time and do different pieces of it. Yeah.
I think your database is wonderful, and that it's great that you have all that information. Is that, are you able, with all the information that you have, to identify like what plants and what recipes were most common for treating certain ailments and diseases, and what were the most common ailments and diseases treated?
That's what we're heading towards. We bit off a big chunk with the texts and the project. So right now we're working on finalizing the single tag. So I have another team we've AI tagged, we've auto tagged a section of the corpus, and then we're human checking it. Sort of graduate student supervising undergrads. That's another student, Yuten, is working on that. And so once we get that finalized and we have a single tag per each character, then we can, or character set, then we can go through and then think about, what's in the recipes and look at frequencies and what's coming up. So I haven't done that question, but that's exactly the potential that it's aiming for. And my goal is to, in the end, to develop like a clinically facing AI query system where you can ask, I've got a patient with these symptoms, and what would Zhang Zhengjing do? What would Zhu Danxi do? And then for it to think about, okay, what are the most closest symptoms, and then produce those recipes, but not to hallucinate, but to give you a rigorous philologically defined text from a time. So that's the goal.
Professor Stanley-Baker, thank you very much for the wonderful lecture. I'm a chemist who did study on Chinese medicine, so I'm still trying to understand the depth of your lecture. I just have a specific question about one piece of work you discussed. So I think in one slide you mentioned that you studied the geography, the history of a peony. So if I understood correctly, you said early document didn't differentiate different types, which I agree. And then I think in your slide you showed two, if I understood correctly, you showed two different drugs. So one is red peony, 赤芍. The other one is white peony, 白芍. So my question is, I'd like to know what is your understanding of the relationship of two medicines. So first a disclaimer. So I'm not authority on the botany because I'm a chemist. So, but during my work, we came to grab this issue. So I don't have all the resources right now. So my recollection is some in the early text there's only one peony, and then some point in the timeline, so the Asian Chinese, they already differentiate the two type of peony. That's one you have on the slide. So however, my understanding is that they still consider the two types are the same plant origin. The only difference is the way of processing. So what I can recall, I think it's correctly, the current literature, including the Chinese pharmacopoeia, stated the two drugs, there are two drugs derived from peony. So, but they are the same species. I just can't recall the scientific name, and the difference is in the way of processing. The one because the drug part used is the roots. So the one with the skin intact is called red peony, 赤芍. The one with the skin peeled is called a white peony. So I'm not sure if I get correctly. So I'd like to know what is your understanding of the relationship? Yeah.
About the difference between 赤芍 and 白芍.
Yes.
I guess for me, so in that visualization, what I was looking at was the text, the text corpuses. And so it's not connected to, at that time, not connected to the botanical things. I could look up in the database and see what it has to say about 赤芍 and 白芍in there. But in terms of the debates that were going on in the Song and Yuan was about the what the functions of these were doing and the import of that in sort of effects on the patient. And so that resulted in kind of different recipe, I don't want to say teams or habits, but different recipe styles, I should say. Why don't we do a live check and find out? I'm gonna, let's see, how do we do this? Do this. Okay. Oh. Okay. So I try not to make any truth claims about practice because although I have a clinical degree in Chinese medicine, it informs how I read texts. I'm not practicing on a lot of patients. So I really want to defer to the authorities. So let's say 赤芍. I'm just going to type in pinyin. You can search in pinyin, jianti, and fanti here. So, okay. So here we have, okay, 白芍 and 赤芍 both came up. Let's see. That's 白芍, and I'll call up 赤芍 as well. Okay. So, species is a problem. 赤芍 has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different species. First, and it's interesting, so this text is just, the data is a little sketchy because it says 神农本草经, but that's kind of anachronistic because at the time it was just 芍药. Okay, and then for 白芍, it's a repeated name. So we can open those up. And that's a single species, a species set. Okay, there we go. So, according to, well, they come from the same region. Let's clear out the region stuff. You can make your graph a little cleaner by taking things out. All right. So, let's make this full screen. Okay. Okay, so according to the data set, Peony electiflora is the same, right? 白芍 and 赤芍. But 赤芍 has all these other species that are also used according to different dictionaries. And you can click on if you want to know, you can click on the links here, and it will show you which text is making that attribution. So this is the 中华本草. This is also that. I was yelled at when I was describing my work at a Chinese medicine conference in Chengdu, of course, right, the capital of medicine. And he said, 你干嘛用这个字典？这个东西都是错的。And I said, 我的目标不是对比真假，我只是要证明人家写的是什么东西. So I'm just a historian documenting what these different texts have claimed. So let's see about this one. So this one. Okay, so the 白芍 one, both the 中华本草 and the 中国药典 both agree that this is, 白芍 is this species. So that's kind of how I kind of play taiji around the debates about 真假. Yeah. Yes.
I can answer this question. I use basil often. I'm not the doctor, but I like it. Especially like you talk the 桂枝汤. The 桂枝汤 is really for the, how to say, 静脉曲张. You know, the leg has blood vessel pump out.
Right.
When you 桂枝汤, the basil have to be double than the original. It's help. As Chinese doctors say that the 桂枝 is circulation with the, how to say that? Okay, one is 静脉, another is the, I forget it now, English I forget.
The varicose veins?
Yeah, the circulation. That's basil is for circulation for 静脉. It's come back to the heart. So,
okay.
But the basil is when they make it, it's from the roots, and they steam or cook, then they dry it. But the 赤芍, the use purpose a little different. It's dry and with the skin and dry it. But when I buy the 赤芍in the store, in the local store, I don't see any skin. So often, like you document all this, wonderful this medicine name for the other people study, right? And you talk about the Chinese produce more the Chinese medicine and provide to whole world. But I have a question is Singapore is doing, they make own the Chinese medicine. They grow own Chinese medicine. Because in China, there's so many demand. And a lot of area is rich on the monetary item, but not rich in the spiritual. So they will try grow fast, or they try make it looks good. So that's in the Chinese community.
Right.
In our own community, we will worry about, certain place you cannot buy it. You have to, in the certain, certified place to buy it.
Right.
So I think the next, maybe you guys doing this, promote to other place, country, can also, produce the same Chinese medicine.
Yeah, it's a huge issue. I remember asking this question of someone who worked a lot in herbal farms, and this was like over 10 years ago. It was like 2014, and I said, there's all this anxiety, and I was in Germany at the time, anxiety about, the use of heavy metals and toxic fertilizers to make the drugs heavier, so they sell for more at the marketplace. So unlike Tao Hongjing's time, when they're painting them red or white, here they're adding fertilizers to make them heavier, but it's got lead in them and mercury, so it's toxic, and the opposite of making people healthy. And at the time I said, isn't this a problem for China? Doesn't the government care? And he was like, no, the economic portion is so small, it's irrelevant. So they don't care. But then I asked the same question of Robert Hoffman, the head of Yosan University, on Saturday. And he said, yeah, now they care, because they know that it matters. And now they know that the other governments are controlling the supply very carefully. So in Britain, that's one of the big things that Kew Gardens does, is they do tests of herbs on the market, on shelves in Britain, and for these kind of heavy metals, and they give guidance on when something should be taken off. In Singapore, it's heavily controlled. Everything gets sent to Malaysia first and tested there and then brought in. And it raises the prices of the herbs a lot. So it actually it's not necessarily cheaper than Western medicine to get 中药. So, and visibility into what's going on in the marketplace in China and all of those big herbal markets, down in Guangzhou and elsewhere. I think that's the next dimension, the next layer, and maybe people will, and you now have in the US like suppliers who are saying, we get ours from a specific place and we farm it ourselves with the farmers there. And so I think things are changing, but what you do week to week, that's a time scale of months and years. But in the week to week, where do you go to get your baishao? That's another question. And I think in that case, where's the intelligence? It's in what you just described, right? Your own seeing, the chishao, it doesn't have the P, even though the color is the correct. And how does it taste? What's the quality? Is it, sanftig, wie sagt man, not juicy, but sticky? What are those qualities? And that you have to kind of trust your own instinct, I think. Yeah, that's it. 就是这样了。
I'll maybe ask one more question. I'm curious what kinds of research questions you're asking to the database now, or what's most exciting you currently?
So one thing that I have to write once the things I have on my desk are off, I want to compare how it's used in Malay medicine and the ones that are shared across, what we're seeing in our manuscripts, because that kind of owe that. That's a blank check I wrote earlier on, and I want to do that and see how they're using it. There's a lot of pediatric medicine in the Malay manuscripts. I know that much, but so I want to work with my colleague. But what's fun is we can now use Google Translate to translate these passages, find the drugs we want, and then once I get a sense for what I want, I can go and ask a smart question, of my colleagues. Other research questions. I mean, I just kind of want to make it up to the point where it can be clinically effective. I see biomedical docs in Singapore when I talk there, and they're like, what about herb-drug interaction? Can you tell us about that and something we can use in the day-to-day? So I kind of want to, rather than chasing my own things, I want to serve and produce things for others, I think, with this data. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your work and your expertise and this really incredible project. Our next lecture in the East Asian Gardens lecture series will not be until January. It will be our annual Japanese tea lecture, so I hope you will join us again then. And please join me in thanking Professor Michael Stanley-Baker again for his generosity today.